So I've never actually trained as a writer. I went to Brighton University, in the days it was called Polytechnic, and I did a degree in visual and performing arts. Basically I was always a painter, I was a fine artist. But then I did this option study in theatre and spent 3 years trying to find the middle ground between visual art and theatre. And so I essentially spent 3 years designing, devising and directing what I realised were live films, or I was trying to make live films. So it was the first time I'd actually thought about film and TV, which had always seemed to me a little bit dry, actually, because of being a painter and a sculptor. That all felt very sort of tactile and immediate, and TV and film always very office-based. But I realised that was the medium I was sort of reaching for. So I left university. It's very difficult to just figure out how you make that transition. I wasn't writing in any recognisable form at that point because my language was a visual language. And the part that felt most accessible wasn't directing, it was writing. So I sort of decided to try and make an inroad in terms of script. And I didn't actively want to be a writer at that point. I wanted to be a director, but I was just trying to find a creative route in. So I managed to I did a few production jobs. I took whatever I could in production, but then I started reading. I was a paid reader in a freelance ad hoc basis for various different TV companies and broadcasters. And from that, I ended up getting a job as a script editor on EastEnders initially, which is where I met my husband first. Then from there, I was a development exec at BBC drama series. I was head of development for several different independent production companies. So I was in a very lucky position where I was reading and commissioning writers to write material projects for the company, but I was also the person who was putting them together with directors and also on the front line with my boss of putting the finance together. So I was spending a lot of time in MIP and MIPCOM at Cannes, at AFM, the various different markets, really understanding what the buyers and distributors wanted and what that interface was between the creative vision and the business aspects. So where a show only becomes a show when someone's willing to pay for it. And I think that was incredibly useful training for me about understanding writing isn't just about self-expression, it's about creating something that people are willing to put money in to make. I feel that all writers should attempt to at least, even if it's with another writer, give notes and feedback in the way a script editor does or a development exec does, because I think having been that side of the desk, what I realised so acutely over and over again was writers think that what's in here is on the page. And so often it isn't. So often they think they've written something and they haven't actually communicated the thing they think they've communicated. And I think quite often notes come from the fact that the reader isn't perceiving it. So actually, as soon as the writer explains what it is they think they've done or are trying to do, quite often I think the person giving notes goes, oh, well, that would be great. I just didn't understand that. And so I think that gap between what you want to write and what you think you've written and what you have actually communicated is a gap that's invisible to a lot of writers until or unless they have that experience of giving notes to somebody else and talking to somebody else about what they think they've written. And also I think it makes you less precious. I think when you are in a position to give notes to another writer, you understand how many ways through things there are and there can be, and you watch that person go through the process. And I think it's a very healthy thing to do, that you, as a writer, one doesn't then get obsessed with it must be this way. You know, I think it makes you more open to seeing different ways through a particular story or character. I think I sort of stuttered into writing. My last development job, I had ended up co-writing something because the writer had been generous enough to invite me to do it because he felt it had shifted on its journey of what it was and what age demographic it was for. And he was a gentleman in his 60s, and the show was for a teenage audience by the time we finished, and he felt he couldn't do it without me. So I co-wrote something with him, and then I was writing at home lots of just spec scripts, just trying to sort of find my way. I did some children's TV. I did a couple of episodes of a show called Magic Janet, and The Queen's Nose, which was a lot of fun. And then I worked in continuing drama series. I think the only way to really learn how to write and to improve is to be permanently in a process of getting better at it yourself. And I think one of the things that I would advocate is find the shows, if we're talking specifically TV, find the TV shows that you love, that you think are brilliant, and watch them with a remote control in your hand, and after every scene press pause and type a very unemotional description of what happened in the scene. Do a numbered document and then press play and do the same for the next scene and the next scene. Do a breakdown of the entire script. And I know there's a lot of published scripts, but there's something about the process of having to do that, having to analyse what is the job each scene is doing in terms of its story function, and break down a whole episode, then look at it, analyse it, colour code, which scenes are the A story, which scenes are the B story, look at how it's put together. And I think there is an aspect of writing that is, you have to sort of be a mechanic. And if you want to build an engine, first take an engine apart to see how it's made. I think writing is the same. So dismantle and take apart the shows that you really love. Then you'll understand how to put them together, and then that will all feed into your own process of putting shows together. I think you have to be a curious mechanic about every show that's out there that's great, but also do the same with bad shows and analyse those. Why don't they work? And somewhere between those two, I think you just ingest somehow that ability to write better. Other than that, I would say write about what you know is always the timeless advice, because I think you can tell when a writer tries to reach beyond something they've got experience of. And I don't mean, obviously we can all write about stuff we've never actually done, but there has to be an emotional and psychological authenticity to it. And it's not hard to do research about any world or speak to experts. If you just sort of fudge it and make it up, I think it shows on the page. A writer's life is about rejection. And 9 out of 10 things that you write will not get made. And that's just the reality. And the industry is getting tougher. It's very much tougher than it was. Hopefully it will have another upturn, but certainly for at least another year or more, we are in really tough times. Everyone's making less. You have to accept that to start with. You have to accept that most of what you write will not get made. You have to learn to be happy with the journey and the process. You have to love writing for writing's own sake. You have to love writing that script beyond any expectation of it actually becoming a TV show. That has to be its own reward. And if you cannot learn how to be happy with that, then I would question whether the level of unhappiness you'll experience is worth it to be a writer. Rejection will always happen. And even with the stuff that's getting made, even when people love your work, there's notes, and then there's more notes, and then the lorry turns up with the big notes. And it is endlessly go away, do it again, go away, do it again, go away, do it again. And I don't think there's any other creative in our industry that has that same onslaught that we do. Directors get given notes, but not when they're on set, really. They're sort of, once they've got their shot lists, they're not just constantly having someone editing the shot lists and leaning over their shoulder and saying, well, no, actually, could you shoot this a bit more like this? Actors don't have someone sitting behind them. Obviously, they get notes from a director, but again, it's a very different way of having your creative work noted. Writers are sort of firefighting from the second you put pen to paper right the way through to the end of production. You have to have armor. You have to be made of steel. You have to understand how to work with other people, how to take those notes, how to constructively feed them into what you're doing, but how to retain your own vision as well. and it's not for the faint-hearted. It is very, very difficult. So even in success, there is a sense of being not necessarily under attack, but there is just this onslaught of, you didn't do it right, make it different, make it better. So I think you have to really be clear that writing is vocational, and writing is just what you love so much, you have to do it in spite of all of that. 6 Feet Under is one of my favourite ever shows. So Alan Ball, I think, is just wonderful. I love Gwyneth Hughes, Sally Wainwright. I love Susanna Grant, who wrote Erin Brockovich and Unbelievable, which was just wonderful. I mean, so many of the amazing American showrunners, I think their work is great, all the obvious names. But I think I'm watching a lot of 70s movies at the moment, and I think a lot of those, writing has evolved, and in some ways in a good way, and in some ways I think in a less good way. And I think at the moment, and generally, I feel excited by proper character writing. I worry a little that I think we've moved into a space where things have become more sanitized. There is much more safety. There is much more pressure to write characters who are sympathetic, who make good moral choices, and the whole sort of thing about, will we like them? And characters, I feel like a lot of the interesting psychological edges get knocked off in the process of development. People are afraid of anything that will be controversial, or any character who says something which is not considered appropriate in the 21st century. I think it's a shame. I think there are incredible characters historically from film and TV who are wonderful characters, who have heinous views sometimes, but they're such brilliant characters. And I think I worry that some of that's being lost. I struggle more to see who's doing that kind of work now. The transition from theatre to TV and film can be very difficult for writers. In my case, it wasn't, because I think theatre actually, weirdly for me, was more the anomaly. When I'd been at university, I wasn't writing in any traditional sense. I was using a visual language. So for me, when I wrote a play, I was I was sort of in the dark, right? Just sort of making it up as I went along, and I did it because I didn't know how to do it, and that's what I was excited about. The funny thing about my play Airsick was that I did really well. Everyone loved it. It got great reviews. But a couple of the reviewers said, oh, it's a bit TV, it's a bit film. So I think for me, that transition, my natural space is definitely way we can, the cutting, the juxtapositions of scenes, the way that you can construct film and TV totally suits me. Theatre has a different set of challenges. You have to carry and turn the story on dialogue for the most part. And you have to find a different focus for the audience, because of course you don't have the close-up and the wide shot. You have, the stage is wherever it is in relation to the audience. And directing the audience's eye is a very different thing. I think playwrights moving into TV, obviously the issues are, they are reliant on dialogue in a way that doesn't work for film and TV. You have to find a completely different way to tell that story. So you are telling the story visually, but also through structure. I think, is it William Goldman who said this? A very famous writer basically said writing is structure. And I think that's true for film and TV particularly. It is literally about how you make those scenes sit next to each other and you construct meaning in that way. Theatre is very different. So I think some people make the transition easily, and for others it's more of a challenge. If it was box sets, I would take The Shield, Sean Ryan's fantastic show, which is like crack cocaine. I would watch it and buy the next series and then buy the next one and watch it and stay up all night. It's just brilliant. It's a masterclass in character writing. I would take 6 Feet Under, one of my favourite shows of all time. Again, just beautiful, wonderful writing and a wonderful meditation on life and death and family and love and all of those things. And I think for the third one, I would probably take something a bit chewier. I think I'd probably take The World at War. I think I find that, you know, the wars, that period of history is so fantastically interesting. But I think, yeah, something a bit more roughage, something that's a documentary that matters.